Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I have a special type of video that I have felt called to do today. I wrote some notes here so that I keep myself on point because you know how I like to wander. Um, so I want to get a little bit sciencey today, but we're going to pull the science and spirituality element together because I feel like right now we're at this junction point in our collective awakening where in order to tap in or become the best versions or remain in the frequency or vibration of the best version of ourselves. Um, we need to be more self-aware of our superpowers, our innate abilities, but our physiological system and how it can inhibit our abilities. It can block, but it can also enhance. And I think sometimes kind of understanding how our physiology works with the spiritual element. Again, combining the two together is really important right now to discern and to help us as a collective, but individually, to be less judgmental, to have more empathy and understand what other people are going through, regardless of the level of spirituality they or where they are on their spiritual journey, regardless of how far they are or and to whose perception. I mean, I don't know how you really judge that, because everyone's on their own journey at their own speed, learning their own things, and some of us have placed limitations on ourselves and blocks for a reason, for many, many reasons, which is a whole other video. So it's really about holding the space for ourselves and for each other and recognizing that, or not necessarily recognizing, but understanding or understanding or having compassion for other people where they are in their journey and not comparing. You know, it's not a comparison. This is not a race. This is not a competition. So, um, there are a lot of people that are very programmed and have been for lifetimes. I mean, this is not the first lifetime. Many of the people that you know that are severely programmed and seemingly rigid and not willing to wake up are working through multiple to hundreds of lifetimes of being programmed. And this is the lifetime where they're really working to release themselves from that programming. But they're, because the timelines are so connected right now and so thin between, like I've mentioned, the timeline convergence, there's a lot of overlapping and confusion and this schizophrenia and multiple personality disorder and bipolar. A lot of these conditions are a result of pulling in timelines and overlapping and bleed throughs, and then the person is not centered and balanced in who they are in this life. They're fragmented for many reasons due to traumas and many things, abandonment, addiction, that they get confused. The line becomes blurred between this life and other lifetimes, and then they start tapping into other realities, speaking about people that don't exist in this reality, and it becomes very confusing to them. So for us to hold the space for those people is just not judging them and recognizing, man, there's probably a lot more to their pain than I even will ever know. Simply, we might never know. And it's really not our business to know what everybody's going through, the journey that brought them to where they are now, all the variables, all the elements, all the blocks, etc. So the known, the knowns and the unknowns. So right now, how can we are at this junction point where we're all healing, we're all trying to define who we are and heal our own souls, while at the same time recognizing that everyone else is doing some version of that. While at the same time, there are dark players purposely manipulating the most vulnerable so that they remain stuck and they are unable to be the best version of themselves and they cannot heal through 3D interference, psychological warfare, MK Ultra programming, manipulation, through many, many avenues you've heard me talk about. I mean, my book, Starseeds and the Great Awakening, spoke a lot about 3D interference and encouraged to change the freedom movement. The one I published this year went into more of the psychological warfare. So there are so many layers to this. Um, Another element of that is through self-reflection is forgiving ourselves, forgiveness. So not only forgiving other people for their wrongdoings, because again, we don't know why they are the way they are. You guys have heard me talk, and those of you who are new to my channel, I've spoken publicly, I've written it in my books, the pain of my past, of how I was really embedded and anchored into my shadow side. And at one point in my life, in my teens and my early 20s until my son was born. And I had no self-love. I had no love to give to anybody. It was really challenging period in my lifetime, and there was a lot of negative self-talk, and it really just it anchored me into a vibration of not being in control, self-sabotage, all of these things. And I was unwilling and stuck to heal myself because I just didn't care anymore, didn't care about anything. And many of us are in that position. And so it, I didn't have compassion for myself. So how could I have compassion and love for others? You know, we have to love ourselves truly and completely before we can really give other people the love like true love that they require. So when I had my first son at 23 years old, that was the pivotal shift and marking point of my life where I made a conscious choice, where I said to myself, I'm going to bring a child into this world. I can no longer be like this. I can no longer think like this. I can no longer act like this. And I made the conscious effort and choice to pull myself out of that shadow side. And when I did that, I started to look at the world differently, and I started to look at other people that I would normally judge or I don't know, just look at, with a negative thought, negative eye, as the enemy. And I started to think to myself, what traumas have they been through, like I have, where they have the results of those traumas or neglect or abuse or whatever it is that they went through resulted in who they are today. And I started to recognize people not for who they were in that moment, but their journey of getting to where they were, good or bad, didn't really matter. If I saw really well-rounded, great people, I thought to myself, man, what their journey must have been like to get to where they are. And it really shifted my perspective on the world in its entirety. Now I've come a long way from even then. That was 20 years ago. My son's almost 20. So I've grown exponentially since then because I feel like we grow in phases. So right now, because we have a large percentage of the population that is activated, continuing to activate, and will activate that haven't yet very soon, it would behoove all of us. It will make this journey easier if we don't look at people through the eyes of judgment and instead compassion and empathy of what's your journey? I wonder what that person has been through. And we just, it will allow us to bring our consciousness to a different vantage point. Our perspective will shift to a little bit more of an understanding as opposed to judgment. And then we can start to forgive ourselves for the things that we've done, take responsibility for our role that we've played in many decisions throughout our life. I mean, there are no accidents, there are no mistakes. They're all opportunities for learning. So we learn and we grow from them, and hopefully we don't make the same mistake more than once. But right now, I think that it's all about calling in the soul. I've talked about right now, we are really calling in the soul. Where in our life, in our journey, in this life, have we dissociated? And have we dissociated for a long period of time? And how do we call that soul back in? There are many ways to do that, and I've talked about that in other videos. And I wrote about it in my book, Courage to Change, the Freedom Movement, the one that I just wrote, where I really focused. The beginning of the book is psychological warfare. So it's a continuation of Starseeds and the Great Awakening. But then the bulk of the book is how to heal, how to recognize when your body is talking to you, and where is our spiritual DNA stored? Where is our physical DNA? stored, or how is it stored, and where are we now, and how do we activate, and how do we ground, and all of these things I talk about in the newer book. But I want to go through some of the elements today, the science of it. So the people out there that are a little less woo-woo will perhaps relate or resonate with the science behind it. When I talk to my son, one of my sons, he's very analytical, very left brain, like super logical, isn't woo-woo at all, appreciates the woo-woo, but and he respectfully says, and he even says respectfully, I need proof. I need the science behind it. So sometimes the science is necessary. And I think when you combine the science and the spirituality, that's the sweet spot. You know, our superpower is our ability to see things from different perspectives, different vantage points, with different evidence or lack of evidence with through faith. So right now, so much of our reality has been built upon us dissociating through distraction. So there's lots of distraction in our reality. There always has been, whether it's sports or music or events or you know, movies, TV, anything that the 3D dark players can do to distract us. It pulls us from our inner thoughts. It pulls us from, you know, you don't have to sit there and think about all of, you know, all of your worries or concerns, or don't think too much. Don't get into too deep thought. We'll fill that void with movies where we can daydream of having the life that they had, or making, or movies that are very um like fear-based or fear-mongering, or they have a lot of movies that are based on truths, but we think that they are false because they're in the movies. So we don't realize that they're letting us know a lot of what's going on behind the scenes through the movies, because we think, oh, it's just a movie. Again, it's still distraction. Through division, which I've talked about many times, through any kind of agenda that divides us, whether it's the oldest, which is religion, oldest tactic. But now we've got every kind of division you can imagine. There's gender wars. I mean, I never knew the concept of male versus female could get so controversial till the last few years. So now they're pinning genders on each other, or the notion of non-genders. Um, your sexuality preferences are now being judged. Your weight is now being judged. It's no longer cool to be thin. It's no longer cool. I mean, it's just, it's convoluted. There is no normalcy anymore. It's just whatever they feel at the moment, that they can herd people into this specific agenda, and then they quickly will switch it up, and then something new will be created. And if you're not part of that, you know, if you don't resonate with that and you don't go with the normal there, then you are ostracized and something's wrong with you. So division, 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 division. Because I think it's part of human nature for us to be, we long as humans. It's just part of our DNA, our makeup to, we're like, we have this herd mentality for the most part. I'm talking majority, where humans desire to be together. If we didn't, we wouldn't have so many of us, and we would be very separated, and we would live alone, and there would be less communities. But by human nature, our design is to come together and create communities. So we have this innate desire to belong to something, to be a part of something, to fit in the normalcy of whatever we perceive in our environment to be normal. We want that. We want to achieve that. That is something that we are kind of raised to believe through generations, and it's carried through our epigenetics that, oh no, it's a good thing to want to do the same thing as that person. We're not wired to think, oh, that person's doing it that way. I should try something different. Again, there are always the exceptions. There are always the rebels. There are always the lions within our reality that are wired differently. And I think that is by design, so that we are able to kind of wake up the others that are the followers. But this reality is designed for us to receive validation outside of ourselves. So we are no longer, whether it's through generational programming or many factors, I believe now more than ever before, or previously to now more than ever before, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. We have been bred to seek validation outside of ourselves. We can't validate ourselves, so we have to look for it from everyone outside of us, our parents, our teachers, our mentors, our pastors, our friends, society. Now that we have social media, it's how many likes do you have? How many followers do you have? How many subscribers do you have? How much engagement do you have? It's not even about how many subscribers anymore, it's the engagement. How many posts are you doing per day? I mean, it's the statistics of it all. It's very overwhelming, very intimidating, and very competitive. So not many people are looking at themselves and validating themselves and saying, I'm doing a good job. This is great. I love this about me. I love this about myself. I am worthy. I am strong. I am independent. I am abundant. Those thoughts are not generated within the collective at large because we are not taught from a young age, and it's not imprinted in our epigenetics and our ancestry to think along those terms. Now, it was once upon a time, and there are many indigenous cultures that preached that and taught that to the next generations. But through the division, like I mentioned, and the distraction, I've talked about this in many, many of my talks. Through separating us and creating a normalcy of not having a tight family unit, it's become much more normal to ship the elderly off to homes or elderly retirement communities, things like that. On top of that, the poisons and toxins in the food have caused an uprising of, I'm not going to say the names of the things, but I think you guys know. I just want to get my my channel flagged for medical disinformation because that's happened to me a bunch. But there are a lot of diseases, conditions that the elderly are getting where it makes them conveniently forget everything and dissociate and detach and get confused. Well, then they can't pass on their knowledge. Because anybody at any age, I don't care if you are 10 years old listening to this, in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 90s, it does not matter the age. Every single year that you live, you learn something and you say, oh man, if I could go back in time last year, I would do something different. So we're always learning. That's the wisdom that we gain through the experiences that we have. And if you compound that over decades, grandparents always have so much wisdom to share with their grandchildren. I can't tell you how many things that my parents and my husband's parents have taught our children. They're so much more centered and grounded. And we think to ourselves, man, why couldn't you have been like that when we were children? Well, because they've grown now. They've been through their experiences, they've relaxed, and they've learned the lessons, and now they're in a much more balanced place. So now that they can't do that, they can't give that to their children, it's too late, but they give that to their grandchildren. And they share the wisdom that they have learned. And that's how you pass it through generations. But if our parents are getting sick with conditions, or they're shipped off to Florida to retirement communities, and we don't see each other anymore, and there's and now there's heightened levels of divorce, and now we've got dismantling of the family unit, and all of these things that they do to divide and conquer, divide and conquer. There's layers to it. Then the wisdom is no longer passed down. It's convoluted. And now we're left to, well, who's going to teach us something? Well, the young ones are listening to each other and they don't know anything. The young ones are looking at the other ones the same age and saying, oh, what should we do? I don't know. And then they make lots of mistakes. Nothing wrong with that. It's just, I mean, it is what it is, right? But all of these things are kind of the design of this reality. It's just part of what we have become. But the good news is we're changing, and the validation that we seek will start to come from within, and it's happening right now. And that's my point. We're circling back. We are seeing a change. We are seeing a shift where people are no longer looking for or seeking the validation from outside themselves, and they're finally saying, you know what? I can validate myself. And that is occurring every single day. So back to the physiology. So how I know about anything that I'm talking about is not because I researched it, but because I took a class many, many years ago called hypnobirthing. So I needed to become certified in order to become certified in natural childbirth with through the method of hypnobirthing, the Mongan method, Marie Mongan's method of helping women have these more balanced, um, desired, conscious, and mindful pregnancies and labors through self-hypnosis, meditation, learning relaxation techniques. And the most important is understanding the physiology of the body and how we go, how our body, everything that our body does to prepare and everything that our body does during labor and how we can work with it as opposed to against it. I had no idea at the time learning those things, which I had wished I had learned when I had my own pregnancies because mine didn't go that way. It is, and remains to be today, significantly relatable to pretty much anything. In my book, Intuitive Transformation Evolution, I wrote about the different aspects between the conscious mind and the subconscious. And in that book, I wrote this book before I believe it was before I took hypnobirthing, but I can't think clearly right now as far as dates. It doesn't really matter, but I wrote about the difference between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind, how it works with us, how it works against us, and I gave them names. So the subconscious, I named the subconscious our friend, and I named the conscious mind our nemesis. And the reason I did that is because our nemesis, i.e., our conscious mind, our left brain, that part of us that is very primal, that is very logical based, that discounts faith and intuition, and is really, I need evidence, I need proof. It's the overthinker in us. It's the part of us that sometimes prevents us from moving forward because we second guess. We say, oh no, that can't be right, or our initial intuition or gut feeling is discounted. So I call it the nemesis because it's that part of us that it's our negative self-talk. It's our mind tricking us into going a different way or not to believe in ourselves, or the self-sabotage comes through the nemesis, which is the conscious mind, that part of us that is still primal. And that's the part of us that is hijacked. That is the part of us that is high. And this is something I didn't write in that book because I didn't know about it until much later. But the conscious mind, the left brain, the primal aspect of ourselves is the part of us that entertains the 3D interference, that it's the part of us that becomes hijacked, is programmed through the 3D interference channels work, the frequencies that are emitted, the programming through the TVs, the technology utilized, a lot of it, especially voice of God technology that makes us think it's our own thoughts. All of that works through the left brain, through the nemesis, the conscious mind. Now, we need the conscious mind. We need both. And I talked about in Courage to Change how it's a delicate balance of both, but I won't get into all of that right now. So I learned all of that and I wrote about that. But to escalate it even further to help me discern and understand the depth of how this works and with our physiology, I learned in hypnobirthing, which is through our autonomic nervous system. So our autonomic nervous system is significant because it has two facets. It has the parasympathetic mode and the sympathetic mode. The parasympathetic mode is the part of us that's like keeps us at homeostasis. It keeps us balanced. It's the part of us that we don't even think about a lot of time. You know, it's our regulation of temperature, our regulation of breath, our hormones, all of that. But it's us in a balanced state. It works to keep us in that balanced state. So in the parasympathetic mode, we have the good hormones running through. We have dopamine, endorphins, all of this beautiful, like that feeling that you have of tranquility, euphoria, or even just calm is when the parasympathetic mode is activated. So when I would teach hypnobirthing, I would work to guide women to remain in the parasympathetic mode as often as possible through conscious choice, through mindfulness, through meditation, through self-hypnosis, many different ways throughout their pregnancy. So by the time they go into labor, their body is already accustomed to switching back and forth, knowing how. So it's much easier to place yourself in that parasympathetic relaxed mode during childbirth than if you were to not do anything your entire pregnancy and then suddenly they tell you to relax during childbirth. That's not possible. You don't know how. You're not trained. You haven't trained yourself on how to do that and the methods that work for you and what doesn't work for you. So it's all about training ourselves to be in that parasympathetic mode. When we are in the sympathetic mode, our pain receptors are activated. We have the catecholamines running through our body, cortisol, adrenaline, and it's these activating hormones. It's our fight, flight, or freeze response to our life. It's our stress is heightened. Our anxiety is heightened when we are in the sympathetic mode. So our body perceives threat. Our body goes into survival mode, not harmonious mode of, oh, things are great. I'm balanced. I feel safe. It's something's wrong. I perceive a threat. Something's going to happen. Imminent threat, imminent threat, imminent threat. So our body produces adrenaline and cortisol, and we shunt our blood to the most important organs, our heart, our lungs, our brain, and then, of course, to the peripheral, to our muscles, so that we can run if that is what we choose to do so in a situation of a threat where we are in need of survival. Not everybody runs, but some people do. So we have that adrenaline and the blood in the muscles so that we can facilitate the running. So that's part of our nervous system for a reason, because if we get into a situation where we need to run, fight, or flee, whatever it is, we're in survival mode, we're being attacked, whether it's by a mountain lion in our ancestors, or just being attacked, mugged on the street, or anything in between that you can think of, that is embedded in our DNA to protect us. It's a survival mechanism. Just like the parasympathetic mode is a survival mechanism to maintain us in a homeostatic balance. The sympathetic mode is to help to save us, to rescue us in a situation of threat. Now, if the matrix is truly, which I believe it is, built upon layers upon layers upon layers upon layers of low vibrational experiences and emotions, fear, how can they push the fear? How can they drive the fear? How can they drive and push the division, which causes hate and resentment and judgment and competition? So now there's sides. So there's lots of hate and anger, resentment, judgment between each other because of the division. Programming is making people feel like they are less than and they can't receive satisfaction or validation from themselves. So they seek it outwards, and they're constantly moving the bar of what's normal for beauty, and as far as weight, color of skin, thin eyebrows versus thick eyebrows, big nose versus small nose, big lips versus. They're never going to stop. They're going to keep changing the parameters so that once you feel like you've obtained, you get the lip injections and now you have a larger butt because you got surgery. Well, 5 years or 10 years, then it's going to be back to, smaller again. And then you're like, well, shoot, I just spent all this money. It's always going to change as far as their agenda so that you don't feel comfortable. You feel shame. You feel you don't have self-love and you don't feel comfortable in your skin because you're comparing yourself to other people. So all of these things, all of these ways, the wars, the financial system and how they really make us, they're like puppets and they pull our strings based on our freedom has a lot to do with how much money we have and what we can purchase and how we can live and how comfortable we can live. The medical industry and our dis-ease in our body and the lack of resources for natural healing and holistic healing and heavily influence on, instead of using the P word, I'll say medication. So that has side effects. And then they become crutches and you need them and you can't live without them. And then this one causes this side effect. So then you need this other medication to combat that. And next thing you know, you cannot survive without these things. Again, all of these things, the educational system, it's indoctrination so that we are heavily programmed from the time we are young age, where we can think for ourselves. They quickly insert the idea, the indoctrination of no, this is how you think. I'm going to teach you. You can't do math you have to get the answer to this equation this exact way. This is the only right way. And I've had too many teachers tell my children that, to the point that it angered me. And I said, what does it matter how they get the answer? What method they get the answer, as long as they get the right answer. And they will argue with me tooth and nail. No, it has to be done this way. Why? Again, it's all about placing people in a box, so making everybody do everything the same way. So all of the things I just mentioned, every single thing there causes anxiety and stress and puts our body in a state of activation of the sympathetic nervous system all the time, repeatedly. And our bodies are not built to be in that mode all the time. That's just not how we were designed. But if we are placed in that mode all the time, that's how we get adrenaline fatigue and all of these things that people are suffering from, autonomic diseases and conditions, and many other things. I've done videos on body talk and what diseases mean and what they're telling you. That's a whole other video. But if they keep this reality in such a manner where the majority of the collective is in the fight or flight mode majority of the time, the sympathetic mode is activated, then we are not in balance. And we are not in balance, we are less likely to tune into the right brain, the right hemisphere, the intuition, the higher knowing, the following your gut instinct, and the peace and comfort of self-validation, self-love, self-reflection, forgiveness, love, the vibration of love. All of those things are really inhibited and prohibited or limited. Not sure what I'm trying to say. If you are in the sympathetic mode a majority of the time, it's really hard to bring yourself out. So then what happens is we create loops and cycles. And our brains are very primal. Our brains are exceptional. But the science of it really is, we work on repetition. Our brain responds and remembers repetition. That's how memorization works. You do 1,000 multiplication questions. I'm getting tongue-tied. As a young kid learning, whatever grade that is, I can't remember. That's how you memorize. You eventually just memorize it. It's repetition. Okay, over and over and over again. So if we have negative self-thought and talk repeatedly, and we're embedded in this survival mode or fight or flight, fight or freeze, or fight reflexes continuously, then we get used to that. Our bodies kind of get used to that. And that's why a lot of people sit on the couch at the end of the day and they can't figure out why they can't relax. Well, because your body doesn't know how to relax. It's lost that ability and it thinks that this is normal. So now the new normal for your body is to be it needs these certain levels of chemicals of adrenaline and cortisol and catecholamines and stuff to exist in the body. Otherwise, it's like almost like withdrawal. It doesn't even know what to do without them. It's so much. It's a convoluted mess. So I spoke about loops in my book, Courage to Change, to express to people, to share how a lot of our habits are us getting into loops, these patterns. They're individual patterns and loops and collective. So a collective loops of addiction, self-sabotage, hatred, dis-ease. I mean, there's so many loops that we can get in collectively, but then also individually, and we pass it on through our ancestry. So abandonment and lack of self-worth, and attracting negative people into our life. And all of these things are loops, and they're patterns that we get into, and we don't realize that our subconscious gets trained to have us recall or even attract things that are conducive for that loop. So if we're in a loop and our brain is trained to keep us in that loop, then we will attract people that are also in that loop into our life. We'll attract experiences that are also conducive to that loop into our life. And that's where we get these negative patterns of, okay, I have all these abusive partners, or all of these negative back-to-back clusters of negative experiences. That's where we get into manifestation. So yes, there's a spiritual element to manifestation, but there is also a very real physiological aspect that can be proven through science, where our brain facilitates our reality through this repetition, this process, because the synapses in the brain become very limited and very narrow-minded to what do I need to remain in this loop, because that's the loop that's become comfortable for you at the time, or for how prolonged period of time, months, years, decades. So your thoughts and your triggers and your desires, your dreams, every single thing from the brain chemistry will arise in your consciousness, things that are conducive to that loop, because that is what your brain is interpreting as necessary. That's the science behind it. So you then, on a spiritual element, your thoughts then dictate energetically and spiritually the vibration that you're putting out and what you then attract towards yourself. I talk about anxiety as a 3D virus in my new book, Courage to Change, as well. And the reason I call anxiety a 3D virus is because I think anxiety is used as a blanket term. It's one of those things like autism. Doctors don't know how to describe it or what it or really where it comes from fully, because there's levels to that as well. So they're like, we're just going to call it this. It's a spectrum. And then it keeps broadening and broadening and broadening. I feel like anxiety is one of those things. They don't really know what to call it or where it comes from. But I'll tell you the simplest explanation that I have received through my sessions and the way I've discerned it to be is really like a virus. And what I mean by that is our brain, our physiology. We are not in, maybe not in comparison to other beings or where we once were before we were modified genetically and, you know, limited in many ways genetically by the deactivation of aspects of our, the DNA and things like that, which is being activated right now. We were once a very advanced and enhanced species that were very powerful. And we had the ability to do so many things, but now we're limited, but we're still very powerful and our bodies can do so many different things. And it's a network of very powerful synapses and symmetry and harmony between, like the brain and heart. I talked about brain and heart coherence. When those two are activated and when the brain is connected to the heart frequency. So there we go. What I mean by that in a spiritual element is the brain, this physiological avatar, an operating system is connected to the soul. When the soul, which is connected to the heart, when the two are in harmony and working together, boom, that's our superpower. That's the magic. We can be very in tune with the physical reality, but also the spiritual reality. And then we are the massive architects and co-creators that are the alchemists that can do and create anything we desire. So our physiology is expansive and incredible. But as I've mentioned, for all these reasons, we are very limited. So there's a disconnect between the heart and the brain, which is the soul and the physical body, right? So because of that, I believe that the anxiety that we're feeling, this heightened anxiety, is our body's physical reaction to something isn't right. It's an alarm system that's going on to let us know that that the loop that you're in, regardless of what it is, or many loops that you're in, addiction, self-sabotage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the 3D interference around you and in your environment, and that's being inflicted on you continuously. And you're being bombarded with signals all the time. So all of those things, your body is perceiving all of these signals and it's saying, alert, alert, alert. There's an alarm going off saying something isn't right. So the anxiety is actually an alarm system going off in your body, screaming like a fire alarm, really loud, saying something's not right, Sherri. Something is not right in your environment. And I'm perceiving it, I'm picking it up. I don't know what it is. So I'm going to start reacting. I'm going to have some crazy symptoms until you figure this out. Headaches, blurred vision, diarrhea, autoimmune disorders, cancers. I mean, you name it. I mean, just think of something and that's it. Diabetes, high blood pressure, a heart attack. I'm just going to throw everything at you until you recognize that something is wrong and it needs to be changed. I think the heightened anxiety in the collective is part of the ascension process, is telling people, hey, something is wrong. Wake up. It's not normal to feel this way. It's not normal to be suppressed. It's not normal to be in this vibration. Get out of your loop. It's an alarm going off and it's trying to get our attention individually, but also collectively. And instead, because of the parameters of the 3D and the things I mentioned, we are given, a pill to take, and we're like, oh, I feel so much better. But that's not doing anything. That's just putting a Band-Aid on it. That's not really helping anything. It's just continuing to suppress, which is what our um, industry, I don't want to say the words, but how we are taught to our wellness, just not root cause. It's just, let's just put Band-Aids on it. We don't really want anyone to get well. So we'll just mask symptoms. So that's what the anxiety is. It's our alarm systems are all going off. So if you have anxiety, it's probably because you are disconnecting from the 3D and your body is trying to tell you something that your soul is trying to emit through. Change is imminent. Get out of that job or leave that person, that bad relationship, make change. But how do you do all that if you don't have the confidence to do all of those things? That's my point. So circling back to the beginning of my conversation is, how can we be the best version of ourselves? Well, we can't be the best versions of ourselves until we raise our frequency. Well, how do we raise our frequency? Because all that really means is we're able to now bring in more light of our own spiritual DNA, our own frequency, but it has to integrate with the body. So if the body is not in the parasympathetic mode, if it's not balanced, if it's perceiving a threat and it's in survival mode, then it won't integrate with the frequency coming through. So then you're prohibited or limited or feeling blocked out of getting out of the loops that you're in, because the two channels are not communicating. There is no heart and brain coherence. I hope this is making sense. So ways that you can train yourself, the things that you can do, truly, truly are simple, but they take, again, it's all about repetition. So how do we create new pathways? How do we reprogram ourselves out of the loops? And there are simple things that we can do, but it's compounded and it takes repetition, takes diligence, and it takes a desire. You have to want it, and you have to put forth the effort, even during the challenging periods where it gets uncomfortable and you feel emotional and traumas are surfacing, and not having that knee-jerk reaction to suppress immediately. It's like, okay, I'm surrendering to it. I'm walking towards it. I'm embracing the change, no matter what it brings. So by shifting your thoughts and your mentality about how the world works in general, just by knowing is half the battle. So my biggest recommendation is trying to take note of your emotions and put them in check. So if you can learn to become more neutral in your reaction to your environment and the world around you, so you don't react with the extremes, because it's the extremes that get us into trouble. So you become the observer in your reality. And all it does is takes a conscious and mindful and intentional way of life. Whenever things happen at you, you don't think about it as it's happening at you. You're saying, what am I learning from this experience right now? And you sit with the emotion, the response, or the emotional response that you have at that time of fear, sadness, whatever it is. And you say, oh, I'm feeling fear right now. What does this mean? What is it trying to teach me? And try to consciously, in the moment, shift yourself to a neutral perspective and look at yourself as, okay, I'm not Sherri anymore in this moment. What if I was watching a movie right now and I saw someone else going through this and I wasn't emotionally attached to the situation? What advice would I give that person? And try to retrain yourself to allow the emotion to happen, because we're humans and we're supposed to have the emotions. It tells us something is wrong or right, or it gives us information, but it's what happens with the emotion next that matters. So you're allowed to be emotional, but it's like, okay, I'm not going to marinate in this anger or rage. I'm going to figure out what it's teaching me, what it's telling me, and then I'm going to make decisions to process it and to remove myself out of it so it doesn't become a loop. So It's all about making conscious effort and choice to bring yourself to a neutral space. It's really hard for me to do this in one video because I could teach a whole class on the specifics. So I'm trying to be I'm being vague on purpose because it's really hard. I might have to do a part two, honestly, but um, it's it's training yourself to look at the reality as a whole, whether it's your life or just reality as a whole, from the macro. I've said this a million times. I'm sounding like a broken record. I know, but sometimes it needs to be repeated. Again, it's the repetition. You need to hear it more than one time. And I've heard it from myself to myself more than one time over and over in the years. And that's how it's become a new program, a new loop, a positive loop for myself that's got me out of the other one. Because if the vibration and oscillation of the third dimension is like this, many people are within, resonating all the time. It's oscillation. There's an oscillation, so it's not always consistent, but there are parameters. It's generally low vibrational, from shame, the lowest frequency, to sad, fear, and then sadness and all of this. So there's a range. So we're oscillating, stress, anxiety, worry, all of the normal, disease. So many of the population is just oscillating. And sometimes you might find yourself, oh man, I've broken out. I'm really doing well right now. And now you're like this, you're a little bit above or separated. It's all about maintaining the separation. And the way to maintain the separation is to be the observer in your reality, in your life, taking yourself from the minute details, to the macro, and then observe. Look at yourself from an eagle, look at the situation from an eagle's view, from a much higher vantage point or perspective. And then you start to have, oh, you know what? Maybe I was wrong, man. I think I overreacted there. I think I did something wrong. And okay, when I come back into my reality and anchor myself back into the present, now I have a new perception of all the elements and other people's viewpoints. And now it's going to help me make different decisions. So getting out of the loops is by thinking differently than you would normally, not caring what anyone else thinks about what it is that you're thinking or doing, but in a respectful way, you still having integrity, because we're not trying to hurt anybody, but we're just not caring about the validation of others. And then you start to develop new pathways in the brain. So one new decision where you go down path B instead of the path A that you always go down. You come home, you're stressed, you crack a beer open, you sit on the couch, you watch TV. That's your norm every single day. You're like, oh, I've had such a hard day. I'm just going to numb myself. And this is how I'm going to do it. And I'm just going to check out and I'm going to watch Netflix until I fall asleep, pass out on the couch. Okay, so that's your loop. That's your sense of self-worth. That's where you are. So now, driving home from work, you say, all right, I'm going to think, okay, what else could I do? What could be more productive? What can I do to get myself out of that loop? And you start to think of yourself as the observer, looking down and say, well, what would you recommend to that person? What would you, and that person might, and the advice you might give to that person is, well, instead of going to the fridge, why don't you go for a walk? Put your stuff down, and it's a beautiful day out. Maybe you get your dog and you go out for a nice walk. And while you're walking, just every time you take a breath, every time you walk, you just release any energy that's not serving you and just kind of let the stress from that day go in a different way. And then and then come home and then see how you feel. So now you have generated a new thought, a new action. You can visualize releasing the stress and anxiety. And now you've now generated new pathways neurologically in the brain. And now it shifts the vibration, and now new information can come through, and now you're suddenly oscillating outside of the normal 3D, not normal, but the regular 3D. So you will notice over time, the more you do that, the more you generate new patterns. You will disconnect from loops. When you disconnect from loops, you'll start to feel more comfortable in who you are, and you'll slowly get your body out of that parasympathetic mode and out of sympathetic mode into parasympathetic mode. Now, ways that you can get yourself, and these are all I really organized it as best I could. So in the book, Courage to Change the Freedom Movement, in the healing section, I talk about all of this. I give examples of left versus right brain, how to tune in and enhance both sides, how to balance, how to get out of the sympathetic mode. I talk about all of this. I'm really just trying to do a quick overview, but the fastest way you can get yourself from sympathetic to parasympathetic is through breath. That's the quickest, cheapest, fastest. You don't need any tools. You don't need to be anywhere specific. You could literally do it in the car, the bathroom, in your office, at your cubicle, anywhere, doesn't matter. And you do a couple, 1 to 2 minutes of progressive breathing. Breathing in any energy that's no longer serving my highest good right now, that's causing me to be in a vibration that's not in alignment with my highest good. I let it go right now and just make the intention is that you're letting go of what's pushing you down right now. And you bring it to the surface, visualize it as a color if you want, coming in and coming from your areas of your body, pulling it in together and into one place, your lungs, hold it, and then your intention is you're letting it go. And 2 minutes of that, you can literally bring yourself into parasympathetic mode. And I know that because I've done workshops in the past where I've had large groups of people get their heart rate as a group, individually, but as a group, together, we all get our heart rates and we write it down, kind of our resting heart rates. And then we do 2 minutes of this exercise that I was teaching. And then everybody got their heart rate again after. And everybody in the room was at least 10 beats per minute less. So it calms the nerves, lowers the blood pressure, lowers your heart rate, releases tension in the body, and promotes an overall sense of wellness. And then the good hormones start flowing. And your body is perceiving, oh, I'm not in a threat anymore. I feel really good. So now instead of shunting the blood to those three main organs, it will, and so, during the fight or flight sympathetic response, your uterus isn't getting sufficient blood supply, your kidneys, your liver, your digestive tract, those areas of the body are not getting the appropriate blood flow during those sympathetic periods, which many people in the population are there a lot. And that's why we get so much disease, especially digestive issues, because our digestive tract is not functioning because when you're in the fight or flight, the digestive system shuts down because that's not important when you're fighting for your life, right? You don't need to eat or digest, it just halts. Well, if you're like that all the time, then your digestive tract is just not working. So when you put yourself consciously and with effort, mindfully in this parasympathetic mode daily through breath work, for example, imagine if you did that 3-4 times a day. I do it all the time. Then you are continuously pushing yourself back to the parasympathetic mode, and now the body is perceiving no threat. It's feeling good, and now you're generating the oxygen and blood flow everywhere that's needed, not just the main places. Then we make room for the right brain and the intuition to flourish. And then the more we are in the parasympathetic mode, the less we are in the loops, the more we are grounded and centered, then and only then will the higher frequency of our spiritual DNA be able to flow through with ease. And then a beautiful integration process happens where the physical body and the spiritual DNA are cohesive. And what's happening even more than that is the perceived dormant DNA is activating, which is our consciousness. And our bodies are shifting into more of a crystalline structure, a higher frequency, where we are tapping in and having innate abilities and activations, which many people are experiencing more and more of. And we're becoming more in tune with our intuition, our senses, our abilities to telepathically communicate and just get downloads. That is a result of all the things I just mentioned. Parasympathetic mode, getting out of loops, generating new pathways of thought, neurologically, the hormones that are conducive of that, bringing in more light, the integration of that light, and then being conscious of our thoughts, the negative self-talk. So we all have it. It's part of it is voice of God technology, but part of it is just the human nature to second guess. That's that nemesis, the conscious mind of, oh, Sherri, you can't do that. So it's okay if you have it, whatever. It's whatever, it happens. But it's recognizing it in the moment and not validating it by saying, I don't think that's my thoughts. Or if it is, I don't believe it. And then you say, and you follow it up, because this is what I do. If I have a thought of, and I say this sometimes jokingly with myself without realizing it. Oh, you're such an idiot. I can't believe you just did that. Just something stupid. And then immediately I'm like, no, I'm not. And then I'll say, I am, and I'll follow it up with something. I am brilliant. I am intelligent. I am strong. I am independent, whatever. I say a couple different things, whatever I feel in the moment. And then it immediately pulls me out of that lower vibration. And now I'm not connecting to any loops. And the more we are conscious of our thoughts, we recognize the self-sabotage and the limiting beliefs and the negative self-talk, and we immediately disconnect from it, pull ourselves from the vibration here to the vibration here or somewhere else that's conducive for you, bringing in more light. And I'm telling you that when you are up, to use this example again, when everyone's down here, this is where the 3D interference works. This is where you get pulled in and sucked in. And this is when you're in tune with the lower density, the lower frequencies, that's when the technology works. The 3D interference works mostly when you're here. If you're up here and you're in a different resonance, different bandwidth, you might get some of the 3D interference kind of messing with you, but it's very limited. It doesn't work on you anymore. So the voice of God technology isn't working anymore. The manipulation, the programming, it's not working anymore. And the higher you go in frequency, you're all the way up here, it won't work at all. You're just kind of like an eagle flying over this whole 3D reality, looking at everything else. And those are the people that are like feeling like, I'm really a fish out of water. I really don't resonate with anything. The food isn't right. People aren't right. The experiences aren't right and joyful. I hate my job. And that's actually a challenging place to be that far gone from the 3D. I'm not even going to say it's 5D. It's just far gone from that lower frequency. It's hard. It's the hardest, I think, to be there right now out of any, because it's harder to find people around you that share that frequency. So it makes you feel really lonely. And there are days where you're feeling like, gosh, maybe I'm making all this up, or something's wrong with me. But don't think that. That just means that you are just so far disconnected that nothing else is really mattering. Nothing else is resonating. You don't want to do all of the 3D things. Nothing is giving you joy like it used to. You don't want to go to a sports or you don't want to go to a sports event or a concert or parties or whatever, a bar. You don't want to do any of that anymore. And the people that you used to find fun to hang out with, like, are feeling just, not that you're better than them, you just don't feel like you have anything in common with them anymore. So that brings me back to several videos ago when I said, are you feeling like you want to hide and you're reclusing yourself? That would be why. But I did mention, and this is the last thing I'll say today, and I hope that my long-windedness has not confused anybody and this has made sense to you, because it's really hard for me to explain this in a simple video. Gosh, there's no way I could ever do shorts. I talk too much. This golden age, in my Starseeds and the Great Awakening book I published last year, I talked about humanity stepping into the golden age. And I just love the fact that that is being talked about a lot right now, because that just shows me that it's actually occurring and we are actually stepping into it, because it's in the consciousness of people's thoughts. That's the word that's being used. The Great Awakening, the Golden Era, the Golden Age, all sorts of different ways to say the same thing. But we're going to see huge changes occurring. But we're still in this like very awkward, uncomfortable period where, and this is a whole other video, so I'm not going to explain it, but I'm just going to make a point of it. There are people, like you said, like I said, that are up here, that are here, that are here, and that are still in the 3D and everything in between. So we have to have compassion and non-judgment for each other, because if you're here, you may not understand the person here. You're in two different wavelengths, and that's no one's better or more advanced technically in this reality. We're all we're all playing a role to help each other. And we just can't look down upon people that are programmed, even the ones that are shaving their heads. I feel for them. I pray for their soul, because they are so far programmed that I don't know if they have the capacity in this life to regain their sovereignty. It's likely that are not going to be able to, the ones that are so far programmed. But I still feel for their soul. I'm not hating on them. I'm trying my best not to judge them, although there are moments where I do, so I'm not going to pretend like I don't, because I'm just like, oh, Jesus, you know? But again, that's the human inside of me. But then immediately I'm like, no, Sherri, like you don't know how much trauma have they been through in their lives. Did their parents love them? Were they abused? Were they sexually abused? What millions of things could have happened to them? And on top of that, how many other hundreds or 50 or dozens of lifetimes have they been suppressed, trafficked, enslaved, where they're so severely fragmented that their soul is just somewhere in the ethers, just like wanting to call all those elements back home. And they're struggling. And who am I to judge? You know what I mean? So try to think about it that way. But I do truly believe that all the healers that have activated, who have been healers their whole life, or who have been activating over the course of the last 20, 30 years, or even this year, you're being called to step forward, because I see, and I talked about this years ago, the future of health and wellness are wellness centers all over the world, individually run and operated, that have a variety of holistic treatments, from herbs and tinctures to frequency, different variations of frequency and technology and med beds, to red light therapy, to ozone therapy, to energy healing. I mean, it's infinite. Acupuncture, acupressure, quantum touch. I mean, you name it. I don't have time to go through the thousands of options right now, but the point is they'll be everywhere. And we will need people like the healers, the nurses and doctors and physicians and surgeons that walked away during the pandemic period because of those reasons, and are don't know what to do with themselves, or the people who don't have any degrees and certifications yet, but are interested in going into different variations of healing. There are millions of people that are going to need, that do and will require healing in some capacity, whether it's mental, so PTSD, fragmented souls that have suffered from schizophrenia, bipolar, diseases, the people that have been, I don't want to use the words, use your imagination. But there's a lot of healing that's going to need to occur, and we need a lot of people's help. So 2025, I believe we're going to see a lot of these centers popping up, and a lot of people getting the true in-depth soul healing that is required for them. So, pull your sleeves back, because a lot of people are about to get to work, and same with our animals as well. So a lot of work to do. 2025 is about change. So my whole point at the end of this is just recognize that there are a lot of people in a lot of different levels of their journey right now. It's going to feel like we're dividing, but then we'll come together in certain aspects. So just use your discernment. And the best thing you can do right now is just focus on your own healing, getting yourself into the parasympathetic mode, balancing yourself, giving yourself the validation that you require, that you need, loving yourself fully and completely, being the best version of yourself, so then you can project out and co-create the world that we want to see, that you want to see, that's conducive and of the highest alignment with the collective and the next generations coming through. And then only then will you truly be able to look at others through non-judgment, through neutral space, through the macro, and forgive. And that's how we have unity. That's how the division and the distraction no longer works. That's how we get people out of this down here and up here. Okay, I'm sure there's a million more things I could say, but I try not to make these videos too long, because I don't want to lose anybody. So I hope that this all makes sense and I've explained it well. Please let me know in the comments. I'm sure you will. There's so much more to it. So this is just, please forgive my brief overview. But I try to kind of make it easy to understand. So, wow. I hope that this video has found all of you well. I appreciate all of you watching and your support, your continued support. So share this if you feel like it resonates with you and it could help other people. I hope it finds you well. And until next time, Bye, everybody. I'll see you soon.